In this video, I will show you how to export your Blender projects into Unreal Engine 5 without having any sizing issues. Let's start. This is Knotman. Knotman is what we are going to be using as an example on how to export over to Unreal Engine. Before we go and export Knotman, there's a few things that we need to check to make sure that Unreal Engine will be able to accept the FBX file that we're going to be creating. Let's go into our collection. The first thing we need to make sure of is that the object is not named armature. It can be named anything else. If you do not change the name away from armature, then you're going to have issues with the animations changing the size of your object. And you don't want that. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get to Unreal. The next thing you want to check is that all of your bones are under one bone, and that bone is called root. It does not matter if your bones have other inner working branches. They just all have to be parented to the root bone. Here's an example with a little bit more bones going on. If we go through here, we can see that we have our armature with one root bone that has all other bones and their branches connected and parented to it. Even the IK pole and target bones need to be parented to the pelvis, or whatever your root bone is. So when we look at Knotman, we can see that every single bone is parented to this head joint bone. The next thing I'll quickly check is I'll go into the animation tab of Blender and I'll just make sure that my animations are actually saved properly. We can see here that my idle animation is saved because it has the 2 keyframes and it does something on the idle animation. This is the same thing that happens on my T-pose. I'm not doing anything special on it, but it's there and it has a keyframe. And for the sake of this project, those are my only 2 poses. Now with all of those checks out of the way, we are ready to start the export process. So we're going to go to File, and we're going to go to export as an FBX file. I'm going to call this tutorial, but you can name it whatever you want. And then we have to go over some presets on this right-hand side here. Overall, the defaults do a lot of the heavy lifting because we don't need to change anything in this include section over here. And we don't need to change anything in the transform. Depending on how you set up your project, you might want to change the forward away from a Z forward to whatever the actual axis you are using is. Same with the up parameter. Where we do need to make changes is inside of this geometry tab. Under the smoothing preset, we want to change this away from normals and set it to face. And then besides that, we should be good to export this FBX file. Now within Unreal, I'm just going to quickly create a new folder that I'm going to call tutorial import. But in general, this would be the name of whatever asset you're bringing in, and it might even be within a nested folder that has all of your different imported assets. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're not doing anything that in depth. Then from our file explorer, we are going to grab that tutorial FBX file that we've created, and I'm just going to drag and drop it into Unreal so that this little pop-up shows up. Now everyone has their own settings they like to click on this menu, and I'm going to show you mine. To give a brief breakdown of what we're seeing here, we want to make sure that we are importing a skeletal mesh because we do have bones. We are going to import the physical mesh because we do have skin, and all of the defaults seem to work properly. This skeleton field here would be if you had already imported the skeleton for the object that you're bringing in and you wanted that to be the reference of the bones that were taking place. But for my workflow, I tend to import both the animations and the skin all at once, so I'm not going to put anything there. Under animation, you want to import the animations that you've created and you want the animation length to be equal to the exported time. With all of those checks out of the way, that's pretty much the only things that I look at and everything else stays as the default value. From there, I'm going to hit import all, and it does some thinking and yells at you for not having the right bone structure, but that doesn't really matter as long as you've set up everything properly, at least in my experience. And now you can see we have all of these different assets inside of this folder. We have the color palette that I used to set up the color for my object. We have a material that's naturally created based off of what we had in Blender. And then we have the skeletal mesh and all of our animations and physics objects. And you can see here, the only animations that exported are the animations that were present when we were looking at our animations tab in Blender. So now let's set this up. I'm just going to drag the tutorial in, and I'm going to rotate it so that we can see those daunting eyes. To check and make sure the animations didn't break on import, I go over to the animation section of these settings over here, and I'm going to change away from use animation blueprint to use animation asset. And that's going to allow me to choose one of those animation assets that also imported. And I'm going to choose idle because that's the one that's doing the most things. So now when I hit play here, we can see that our tutorial Knotman is here chomping at the bit. Now, for those of you looking at the screen, you might see that this Knotman over here is small. This Knotman is a cautionary tale that shows you what happens if you don't change the name of your object away from armature. If I change this animation and clear it so that there's no more animation attached, we can see that this not man is the same not man of the other not man. But it's when I add that animation asset back in that it gets really small. And that is what happens when you name the object armature inside of Blender. Regardless, that is my current workflow for exporting things out of Blender and into Unreal Engine 5. If my workflow dramatically changes, I will make another video so that you stay in the loop and can do the same. If you got value out of this tutorial, please consider subscribing to the channel because I am making more tutorials like this pretty consistently. Thanks for your time and happy gaming.